Thank you very much for that introduction, and thank you to everybody. It's a pleasure to be here to be sharing with you this rapid response module. This is a 1-hour module and a self-learning module that we developed to respond to humanitarian crises. And you'll hear a little bit more about that from my colleagues. They're the designers and I'm the researcher. So they'll start by explaining what this module looks like, and then we'll demo the module, and afterwards I will step in to tell you about a pilot study we did here in Greece to test it out.
So before telling you about the module itself, I'm going to present quickly the context. This module has been designed for humanitarian interpreters, but the term itself can cover a variety of situations. So just to clarify it a little bit, InZone defines humanitarian interpreting as the act performed by interpreters working with organizations with a humanitarian mandate, such as UNHCR, ICRC, MSF, Save the Children, etc. And on the screen, you have the 4 characteristics also defined by InZone as belonging to humanitarian interpreting. Now, according to UNHCR, for 2015 alone, over 1 million people arrived to Europe by sea, and over 1.3 million people applied for asylum. And to give you an idea of the magnitude of the need, for each asylum application, several interviews are necessary with different authorities and organizations. And for each of those interviews, interpreting is required. It's very difficult to find trained interpreters to cover all these needs. The situation is particularly critical in Greece and in Turkey. And that was the starting point for developing this module, the significant need for humanitarian interpreters, not only for the European refugee crisis, that's one example, but there are a multitude of similar situations everywhere else. So the need for humanitarian interpreters, the lack of basic orientations for these interpreters, the lack of training in a broader sense, and the impact that this lack of training can have on everyone involved in a humanitarian situation. I've spoken of the refugee crisis, but humanitarian interpreters also work in disaster zone settings. Think of the earthquakes in Haiti or in Nepal, for example. When there's no interpreting provided in these situations, then very often the local population cannot have access to relief workers working there, and they are excluded from the decision-making process completely. In asylum settings, the situation is a bit different. If you don't have interpreting services, then asylum seekers are losing the rights that are granted to them by international humanitarian law. And to cover for that shortage of trained interpreters, very often stakeholders in fragile contexts will recruit untrained interpreters, most likely on the basis of their alleged language skills only, and they won't be able to provide enough training. And the results can be very harmful both for all parties involved. I'm sorry, I skipped through some of the slides. So to come back to the consequences, there's been one study by Sonja Püller-Bauer in Austria, in the Austrian refugee context. And among the issues that she underlined in that study are misunderstandings, role conflicts, terminological gaps, and so on. That's for one context, but InZone has seen these same issues repeatedly in every other places where we've worked. And just to give you a few concrete examples, that can be an interpreter will switch from the first to the third person singular within the same interpreting assignments, or interpreters who are going to leave out important information. Think of an asylum interview. If you're missing part of the message, that can be absolutely crucial. Or interpreters adding their own personal opinion to what they're saying. Now, I don't have to tell anyone in that room that is not professional practice, but it keeps happening because these people don't have the training necessary to understand these issues. So that's what we've tried to do with this module. We're trying to leverage e-learning to provide, it's a very basic course to this very specific population to try and tackle the challenge of training many interpreters, because in this situation you need many interpreters on a very short notice, and that would be extremely difficult to do in a face-to-face context. So that's what we've tried to do with this module. And before giving the floor to Emma, I'm just going to present real quickly the module itself. It's a 1 hour free on-demand e-learning module, and it's been designed to fit the very specific needs of the humanitarian context and not fragile context. So it runs on low bandwidth. It fits all screen sizes. You can play it on a tablet or on a phone, on a smartphone. And it's meant to be accessible to people with low English or low IT skills. So in a word, it's meant to be understandable to the widest audience possible. And for more details, I'm now leaving the floor to Emma.
So the core target audience for the rapid response module is really local bilinguals who can be immediately deployed on site, because they are already there, basically. But the open, online, and on-demand nature of the rapid response module makes it accessible also to secondary target audiences, such as bilinguals with the right language combinations that can be deployed to potential humanitarian emergencies. And this was the case for the pilot we'll be telling you about later, but also humanitarian interpreters working internationally who already have some experience, and the module in this case could formalize some of the aspects that they've already encountered during their work. And then we have local authorities and all stakeholders working with humanitarian interpreters. So we have all humanitarian actors in a broader sense. And outside of the rapid response framework, anyone really with an internet connection and an interest for the topic. Now, after completing the rapid response module, learners should be able to understand the basic and most crucial aspects of their work, which is obviously to interpret between actors involved in humanitarian settings. From a pedagogical point of view, we made a key distinction between building, that is introducing and sort of explaining orientation type knowledge on the one hand, and applying that knowledge on the other hand. And the approach that we adopted is to prompt learners to gain a basic grasp of the key concepts and principles, and practice applying them rather than sort of acquiring factual knowledge and developing skills. So what you see on the screen are the content that is threefold and corresponds to the three basic learning outcomes, the desired ones: interpreting itself, cultural and ethical aspects, and also psychosocial stressors and strategies. Now, the learning outcomes and the main elements of the rapid response module were drawn from the rather limited existing literature on humanitarian fragile context in general and humanitarian interpreting in particular. But to make sure that the course's content reflects realistically the reality on the ground, we conducted extensive interviews with UNHCR and OCHA officers who have worked with humanitarian interpreters in the field in places such as Kenya, Lebanon, and Nepal. And they were able to share with us a range of anecdotes highlighting the challenges, of course, but also the rewarding aspects of their job. And obviously the module builds on InZone's extensive experience in the field, training humanitarian interpreters in conflict zones and fragile settings. Now, we envisage a range of distribution channels. First and foremost, the module will be made available free of charge through the Disaster Ready platform, which is an open online learning platform providing educational resources to relief workers internationally and volunteers as well. But we're also looking at considering the option of making the rapid response module preloadable on electronic devices, such as flash drives and tablets. We're also considering the option of localizing the rapid response module into French and other languages in demand, such as Arabic, first of all, or in the context of the European refugee crisis in Greek or in Turkish. So we'll listen very carefully to your presentation. And we might also want to adapt the rapid response module for actors working with humanitarian interpreters, so relief workers, the NGO sectors, etc. And we're now going to show you a demonstration of the rapid response module. So, over to Barbara.
So the module has been developed with the software that Tamara was telling us about, Articulate Storyline, and as you can see on the menu on the left, it's divided into several sections, and there's an overarching narrative of one day in the life of an interpreter. So learners are given the role of a new recruit, and they're going through their first day of assignments. They're helped out by three main characters. The introduction serves to present humanitarian interpreting itself and the narrative of the module. Then the orientation meeting serves to present the very basic concepts, which are then reinforced through a short quiz and, most importantly, 3 realistic training scenarios: 1 medical consultation, 1 family interview, and 1 focus group. And at the end of the module, at the end of the day, there's a debriefing scene that serves to recap what has been presented and to give some more information on what the next steps can be for learners. I'm just going to show you really quickly a few slides to give you an idea of what it looks like. Since we know that some of our learners might not be used to using e-learning of this kind of technology, we are explaining at the beginning how the module works, so then they can focus on the content itself. It's really basic, and every single function is within the module itself. You don't need anything else. And as I was saying, we're presenting humanitarian interpreting and the fictional context. So learners are working on a place called Gathra Island, a small island that has been hit by an earthquake. On this island, the relief workers are speaking English, and there are 2 different ethnic populations, each speaking an imaginary language, Catherine and Daririn. Then learners meet the 3 main characters who are going to explain the different concepts.
So again, hi there, my name is Nancy, and I've been interpreting in the humanitarian field for over 10 years. Although my level of Gatran is not quite native, I speak it very well. There is a lot to know about this profession to be prepared to help. For starters, interpreting is not just about translating words.
And as you can see, in case a learner hasn't heard everything or wants to check something, everything that's been said orally in the module is included in the transcript that's accessible at all time for each slide. I'll show you one quick example of the way we present the different concepts for note-taking, for example.
On some occasions, you might be able to take notes that will help you remember what is being said. Always try to have a pen and paper with you. Numbers, names, and places are especially hard to remember if you do not note them down.
Now, that probably seems obvious to everyone here, but we know from the work that we've done to get to this module that it is not. In a humanitarian context, these information are not obvious to all, to our target audience. And for those who have time beyond the 1-hour module, we give access to 12 separate documents that give more details, because this is a basic introduction. So if they want more information, they can have access to that as well. And really quickly, I'll just show you how the scenarios work. Learners are put into a situation, then they're given a choice, and they receive a feedback depending on the choice that they make. For the medical situation, for example, we have this one.
Dr. Carpe has finished the examination and he's now going to give his diagnosis. Here is what he says in English.
So here, for example, it's the issue of not knowing one word or another in one of your languages. What do you do in that case? And here there are two choices, and some of the questions are 2 or 3 depending, and we're going to try with this answer, for example.
It is perfectly all right not to know everything, but if you omit these words, you might unwillingly change the message. Admitting you do not know a word or expression and seeking clarification is a sign of professionalism.
And one of the ways we reinforce the different concepts that are presented is by prompting learners to try again when they don't get the situation right the first time around. And that's one feature that runs through the entire module. At the end of each scenario, they get a recap first, and then they're asked if they want to try it again, if there were some elements that they didn't grasp the first time, or if they want to go on and continue. And at the end of the 3 scenarios, we have, as I was saying, the recap.
We have given you a very brief overview of what your role will be as an interpreter in disaster-affected zones. But there is a lot more to interpreting. It is a complex job full of nuances, and there is so much more to discover. One place to start is the resources section.
And in that resources section, there's information for those learners who might be interested in getting further training and in making a livelihood out of humanitarian interpreting. So that's also one information that they can find within the module.
Your help is vital. Your words matter.
So I will very briefly present the pilot study we did to see how this module was working. We had 2 research questions. First of all, after the rapid response module, have the participants grasped the basics of humanitarian interpreting? And secondly, does the design promote fast completion and scalability? This was a pilot study. We did a pre-course and post-course questionnaire, and the results I'm presenting are based on the post-course questionnaire only. We used a Likert scale with 5-point questions, and there were a few free response questions as well. We had informed consent forms. We aggregated the data to maintain confidentiality, which is particularly important in humanitarian settings. And we based everything we did on the humanitarian principle to do no harm. We had 3 groups of participants who took the rapid response module in Greece as part of a collaboration with Translators Without Borders. This is ongoing, and there are more people still taking the course as we speak. But in the 3 first groups, there were 31 participants, 15 of whom were females. And they worked with English in combination with a variety of languages: Arabic, French, Greek, Farsi, Kurdish, Dari, Urdu, and Dutch, sometimes 2 or 3 of these. Some of these participants also completed InZone's blended basic course, which I will not be speaking about today. And we had 18 complete the pre-course questionnaire and 15 the post-course questionnaire. As I said, this is a pilot, so we were just trying to get a descriptive sense, some basic quantitative data, and of course, since we're working with a small population, that's all we could do. We cleaned up the data to remove any duplicate responses because a few people did respond twice. They were very gung-ho. And we aggregated the data to ensure confidentiality, as I said. So the first research question, have participants grasped the basics of humanitarian interpreting? We had 3 different categories for looking at this based on the 3-fold structure of the module. Have they understood basic interpreting skills? Have they understood professional expectations and ethical considerations? And have they understood the psychosocial aspects of interpreting and self-care? And there were various indicators for each of these. And we found that for all 3 of them, they had very positive responses, an average of 4.6 out of 5 on a 5-point scale in terms of understanding these concepts. The second research question was, does the design promote fast completion and scalability? And we broke this down into 3 different categories. First, course completion. Out of the 15 learners who answered the questionnaire, 14 said they completed the course, and the 15th said she didn't complete the course, but actually she did, but not within the hour and a half that was allotted, so she marked this as not completing the course. And we looked at how long it took to complete the course, and 60% of the learners were completing the course in the time frame that was forecast, namely between 45 minutes and an hour and 15 minutes. We had a third that took a bit longer, and if you look at their data in more detail, you see they took longer because they were going into those additional resources that my colleagues were telling you about. I should mention that the participants here were being paid something by Translators Without Borders to participate. So we can't use this to generalize about scalability, but in any case, we saw very positive results that everyone was completing the course and that they found it to be motivating, that the content was logical, and this interactivity encouraged them to explore the content. And in general, they found English to be a suitable language of instruction, but about a third of the students said it would also be great if it could be localized into other languages. So we would argue that if the course is localized, that would help with scalability, that we can collect data not only for a research purpose, but also to feed it back to the designers for improving the course. And of course, we'd like to do further research on this, a follow-up down the road to see whether they've continued to retain these key concepts. We would conclude, therefore, that the students did grasp the basics of humanitarian interpreting, that the interactive nature of this course supported self-study and motivated participants to complete the module, and that given this, the rapid response module could be considered a solid lead-in to more advanced humanitarian interpreting courses and could be a model for future e-learning courses. I'd like to thank you for your attention. We're happy to take questions.